Hello and welcome. My name is Yves Sandfort, and today I'm going to walk you through the VMware vRealize Automation 7 simple install, which you can usually use for a POC, demo, or lab environment. If you want to reach out to me, you can most easily do so on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @YvesSandfort, or drop me an email at y.sandfort@comdivision.com. My role inside comdivision is I'm one of the senior architects. I'm also VCDX number 203. So let's get started with the vRealize 7 implementation. So the one step I'm going to skip here is how you are going to deploy the OVF. I guess all of you are able to do that. So what I did is I deployed the vRealize automation appliance, so you provide IP addresses, etc. I also created the DNS record already. So once all that is done, you power on the appliance, and once you try to access the VRA appliance web interface, you will be presented with this new VRA-based installation wizard. Let me warn you in one thing, if you are going to cancel out of this and do any manual implementation steps, then you can't continue with this one. So once the assistant or wizard has been started, the first thing is you need to confirm the license agreement, so you accept it. I have read it before, so I don't need to scroll down to the bottom, but normally you should clearly read it. Then you have a new choice, and that's really new, is you now have the opportunity that you can do a minimal or an enterprise install. This video is just going to be the minimal install. We are not going to touch base on the larger implementation of the enterprise install or stuff like that. We are just going to do this. So minimal install, you hit next. And I also confirmed that I want to do the IaaS installation. And now you see a list of tasks, which is actually done pretty neat. One thing I'm going to do next is I'm going to download the Windows component, which is a new agent. I'm going to run that, and that's going to deploy it on my IaaS system. This agent is quite important because it will later on allow us to run tasks against this Windows machine. And that way all the manual steps we had to do in VRA 6 and stuff like that, where we had to manually do the prerequisites checks and a lot of setups and IaaS and all that kind of stuff, you do no longer need to do that manually. This is all going to be done by this assistant. And I'm going to just install that. You link that back to your VRA appliance. You give it some user account and password. In my case, I'm using the administrator because it's just a demo environment, but normally you should have a separate instance. As you can see, this is a rather quick and straightforward process. It's a simple basic install. I'm doing this now on a 2012 R2 system with basically not much installed on it. The only thing I prepared here is a Microsoft SQL Express instance to be used later on for the database. So, as you can see now, this step has been completed. The only other step I'm going to check now is I'm going to actually add an NTP source. So just to be sure that my VRA appliance and the IaaS system are both using the same time settings, I'm going to change the time settings now for both systems. And now I'm good to go with that. Hit next, and now we get to the prerequisite checker. Again, this is much easier, much more straightforward than it was in the past. The prerequisite checker will do all the stuff the old one has done, but it actually allows you to do a lot of the installation pieces here as well. So it's a bit irritating in the first place. So you see up there the script, and then down there is the actual run button. I had to look for it in the beginning when I ran that the first time, but actually once you know that, it's pretty easy and pretty straightforward. So this is going to take a while. I'm going to fast forward on this one, and then we are going to move on with the findings and actually install all the components like IaaS, etc. from the actual appliance here. So now we will see the results. You will see a lot of red arrows and stuff like that. Don't get too confused with it. You can scroll down, by the way, and actually go step by step through them. And then the next step you are most likely going to do, so you see show details, and now you see all the different errors and issues, and if you were to scroll to the right, you could also see the solutions for it. We are going to just hit the fix button, and what's going to happen next is now the agent together with the VRA appliance is going to fix all the issues in the Windows box, and finally it's going to ask us to actually reboot the box, which is quite interesting because in our scenario here, I actually ran the install, so the wizard from the box which we need to reboot now, and that was actually quite irritating for me in the first place, because my first feeling was, okay, now I'm screwed because I can't start the wizard again. But actually they even thought about that piece, so we are going to fast forward until the wizard is completed, installing all the prerequisites, reboot the box, and restart the wizard from there again. As you see next, the system is now going to actually try to reboot. We are going to necessarily help it because of the video recording a bit. You can see it tries to automatically kick me out. You can see also that the installation of the IIS components, etc. was done correctly. The good part here is you just need a Windows box from now on. It really makes your life so much easier. So let me quickly close all the windows on this box and give it a quick restart. So again, this is quite a huge change between VRA 6.x and 7. 6 was much improved from 4 and 5, and there were a lot of people who said, okay, this is still an issue. But as you can see with version 7 now, they really made a huge step forward, and this is really improving it and make your life when you do POCs, demos or installs a lot easier. And again, as I said, I'm going to record a new video on the enterprise install soon as well, and then we can start taking a closer look on that part as well and see how we can actually leverage that and make our lives a bit easier with that as well. Okay, I'm going to relog into the box next, and once I'm back into the system, I'm going to quickly move over and work through the necessary next steps. So go back into the wizard and actually move on from there. So back into the system, again, we accessed the appliance, and this was really the first time I tried this. This was the part where I was not sure what's going to happen. But again, it's going to actually pick up exactly where you left off. So as you can see, the installation wizard is going to be reloaded, and it's validating where you left off, so it puts you exactly where you left off. I'm going to rerun the prerequisite checker now. Again, you should always do that even after the install, because something might have go wrong and you might not immediately see that and actually get a breaking setup at a later point in time. So again, this runs perfectly fine with the wizard and will take a couple of minutes. Okay, once that's done, you should hopefully see the same wonderful green OK button I have seen here. Again, you could click show details to get further information, but as we want to move on now, we are going to hit next, and the next step is actually to pre-configure the information about our VRA system. So if we were to use a load balancer or anything else, you were to enter that. In our case, it's pretty straightforward. We are just going to give it our internal address for the demo SDDC. So we are going to call it vra.demosddc.com and hit the next button. Be sure that you always use a full qualified domain entry and that it's all set up in DNS already. It's going to do some checks now, and it's also going to do that later on, but it's always best practice to have that. So for the single sign-on components, we need to define a password. Usual compliance rules are below. You cannot change them at this point in time, just accept that they are there and that you need to set up something. And once that is done, and by the way, single sign-on is now done via the identity manager and no longer the SSO from vSphere. Next is the IaaS host. So you give it the host name, you give it the box where it should be installed, you provide it with user account information for the AD account, and including the password. And the same as with VRA62, for all the encrypted parameters, you are going to provide it with a passphrase for that as well. Let me retype that. Okay, now we have the same length, so it should hopefully be the same password. Next is you are going to give it information on how to access the Microsoft SQL Server instance. Again, for a demo POC environment, like in my case, it's perfectly fine to use the SQL Server Express. You just need to set it up manually and provide it with the provide the services with the necessary parameters so that they are accessible in that specific case. So pretty simple, provided with the name of the machine. In our case, it's the same box, so ias.demostdc.com. You can also define whether you are going to use a new database or you want to use an existing empty database. In our case, we are going to use a new database and we are going to use Windows authentication as well, just to make our life a bit easier. Remember, SQL Server needs to be set up for that. That's something the prerequisite system currently doesn't do for you. You hit next, and now you need to define for your dems where you want to place them. In our case, pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Dems are going to be on the same box, so we leave all the settings the way they are and just hit the next button for them. It's validating it in some settings. Next thing after the dems is the agent setup. So we provided with all the information on how to access the, or what should be set up as the vCenter agent, which username password it should be run under. Again, once that is done, hit the next button and you're good to go. Now we are off to the certificates. Again, it's self-signed because it's an internal test environment, nothing really too sophisticated. You need to provide it with the necessary names for the organization, organizational unit, and the country code, and then you can generate self-signed certificates for these specific use cases. And that will be basically the same for the VRA appliance. You need to provide that for the web services and the manager services as well. So again, provided with the organization, type it correctly would help. Doesn't really matter, but just to make it look a bit better. Org unit, in our case, comdivision unit, country code, then you set to generate the self-signed certificate, going to take a couple of seconds. Once that certificate is created, we can move on to the next step, do the same story again. So as you can see, certificate is created. Hit next. Now for the web services, again, same procedure, generate the certificate with the necessary information about the name of the organization, the organizational unit, and the country code. Everything else is not necessary. Again, for a real implementation, I would expect that you were to use some more sophisticated certificates, like from your own internal root CA or whatever else you are going to use for that. Good. Again, wait for the calculation of the certificate to be done. And then there is one more certificate to be done, which is the web server certificate. We can just keep the one which is already on the box. No need to generate an additional one in that specific case. So hang on, that was the web server certificate. We can keep that, which we just generated, and then for the manager service we can keep the one which is pre-installed or has been generated with the IAS deployment we did before with the prerequisite checker. No need to make any additional changes to that. So we just hit the next button again, wait for the certificate to be generated, and then we are nearly almost done. So the next thing the system is going to do now is it offers us to validate the configuration. So this is again another safety net they implemented with VRA 7, where the system is going to now really ensure that all the parameters and all the information we just provided all make sense. For that, you are going to hit the validate button, and then the system is going to do all kinds of checks for you. So let's see that all these checks are completed correctly. So this is really going step by step through all the individual components. It validates that the database is set up correctly, whatever you can imagine. It takes, depending on your environment, 10-15 minutes. I haven't really seen it take much longer for most of my environments, so it was 5, 10, 15 minutes. If you have an external database, that might delay the process. If you decide to implement all these services on different boxes, that's where you might see some delays. But again, this is the demo and simple install. You typically put all on the same box, so you should almost in most cases see similar results, and ideally if everything is set up correctly like we did before, you should be good to go and all of them should be successful, and then we can just hit the next button, which is going to lead us to a very, very important next step, because the next step is kind of not only the second safety net, it's another thing to actually force us to do things again and again and again. Now the system actually asks us to go back into our vSphere environment and actually take snapshots of all the relevant systems before we move on from here. And that's what we are going to do next. You're not going to see that because that's outside of that demo box, but that's what I'm going to do to prevent that we have to redo things again and again and again. So once all the snapshots are created, you can safely hit the next button. Actually, in my preparations, I had to do this a couple of times, and because there are a few issues, I will point them out at a later point in time where something could actually go a bit wrong, which is not really a fault of the product. It's actually more misbehavior on how I'm going to use that. So next we are going to confirm the installation. You just hit the install button for that, and then you will see that the process actually kicks off and shows you, similar to the validation process we have seen before, individual steps on how this is how this actually works. So you can now see it's first it ramps up the identity manager or simple install. Once we see that being completed, you can see in the next step it's going to configure the database, and again that's more or less the pieces we have running in the on the VRA appliance. So single sign-on, Postgres, and some basic configurations. Then it waits for these individual services to be fully powered up and operational before it actually then moves into the next piece, where we are going to do the configuration of the IaaS pieces, bits and pieces. So again, there are validations and everything included into most of these individual steps, which I think is really good. It's a straightforward process, and I haven't seen such a streamlined process, especially compared to the ones before in other systems, especially enterprise systems like this. Um, it's a very slick and clean process, and you will see on the enterprise type of deployment, which I'm going to present in a separate video, that even that has improved dramatically. That was yeah, I would call it a mess, but it was very complicated in the 6.x versions, and now we have a streamlined process which basically takes you by your hand, step by step, and does all the necessary bits and pieces. The only dream piece you could actually think about is that hopefully in one of the next future releases it's going to talk to systems like NSX or something like that and do all the configuration of load balancers and everything like that for you. Okay? Once all these individual components are installed and have been succeeded, the next thing is to license. Be careful. You need to provide a license key which actually runs for all the services. I ran into that in the beginning. I had to actually use a vCloud Suite Enterprise key for certain features, so be sure that you add that. As you have seen, I haven't shown you that, but I can show you my license keys for sure. And then you actually configure it with an initial content user. This step is actually, even if it would fail, not necessarily a big problem, because now VRA is already fully set up and clean, and you can basically slick and directly start from here. Oh, here we go. It actually quickly fails for us, but we are going to just rerun that, and then you should see a successful installation. The point where it fails is a license key which doesn't fully comply with all the features you're going to install, so the ASD run needs full license. As you have seen, once all that is done, you basically get to this screen, you log in as administrator and with the password you defined before, and everything is up and running. Okay, this was it. This was the simple install for POC, demo, or lab environments of VRA 7. My name is Yves Sandfort. I hope you enjoyed today's show. I'm VCDX number 203 and CEO of the comdivision group. If you want to reach out to me, you can do so at my Twitter handle @Yves Sandfort or drop me an email at y.sandfort@comdivision.com. Thanks and see you.